right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us at AtScale's office hours. My name is Cord Johnson. I'm the VP of Growth here at AtScale. Like I already said, I'd like to welcome all of you guys to AtScale's office hours. This is going to be a monthly series where we have a guest discuss topics pertaining to how AtScale helps organizations modernize their operational analytics. So we're excited today because we are joined by Scott Howser, AtScale's Chief Product Officer. Scott has tremendous experience in the analytics space. He's previously held executive roles at DataRobot, Newtonian, Vertica, and Discover Card, amongst other spots in his career. We asked Scott here today because we wanted him to run through some of the new features in AtScale, as well as speak to a few examples as to how AtScale is working with existing customers. And then what we'd like to do is hopefully finish up with a couple minutes of Q&A for anybody who is in the webinar. So with that, Scott, thank you for joining us. And maybe you just want to do a quick intro and we can dive right into it.
Great. Thanks for having me, Cord. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Cord said, my name is Scott Howser. I recently joined AtScale as the Chief Product Officer and have been with the company now about 90 days. And I'm really excited to work with customers, partners, and prospects alike in helping them along their journey towards, the cloud-based data warehouse, operational analytics, and the like. So we see a lot of customers in and around the space going through a lot of transformation, and leveraging AtScale as sort of the key tenet in that transformation process. So, perhaps, Cord, we want to jump in. I think we've got one slide we got to show up here, which is sort of the status, required about the safe harbor statement about things that we might say or talk about on the call with respect to feature functionality and futures. But that being said, I think we can jump right in and make the best use of our 30 minutes time here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scott, why don't we start with the recent release of AtScale 7.3? I know there are a couple of interesting aspects to that release, and why don't we just have you just run through a couple of them for us?
Sure. So I think some of the most exciting things about AtScale 7.3, the first one is clustered AtScale. So if you think about what organizations want to do, and as we become more and more dependent on analytics in general, the idea that we need to be able to scale that infrastructure and take on new and evolving environments was critically important. And so we think a lot about how we help our customers continue to take on bigger and broader data platforms and data sets in general, and ultimately how they want to scale their analytical environment. And so the first step along that journey is the idea of clustered AtScale. And so what we've done in 7.3 is provide the mechanism to deliver AtScale beyond a single node or in a highly available configuration where it's not just protecting against hardware failures or network partitions, but it's also providing scalability in the sense that as you add additional nodes, the scale with the cluster goes up. So meaning that we can take on additional query workloads, we can maintain very crisp response time, even as the number of users grows, concurrency grows, that sort of thing. So the clustered AtScale capabilities in 7.3 are a significant move forward for us, and really excited to see how it's helping our customers continue to grow their analytical footprint in a seamless way. The idea about Cube Data Preview was really important because it starts to, you see as customers work through developing or defining a cube and looking at relationships or dimensions and measures, and having to publish that and show it to users before you can actually see, hey, what does this look like? Or is this going to meet the needs of the use cases or the requirements, et cetera, before publishing it, became something that our users had said they'd like to see. And so with 7.3, we now provide the ability to do that sort of preview before the cube gets published. So I think a lot of the underlying drivers in AtScale beyond just 7.3 really think about three key tenets, right? Performance, security, and agility. And so as you think about the work that we'll do and the features and functionality we'll continue to bring to market, and the way that we'll continue to think about concepts like virtualization as an idea, those three key tenets for us are critically important. And so, as we've talked about, how do we get to production faster? How do we bring more workloads on? How do we embrace emerging platforms in the cloud, right? Those ideas are being driven forward based upon those three tenets of performance, security, and agility. And I think the last bullet here on the slide, goes to that in the sense that we've invested a lot in making the upgrade process very straightforward and seamless and easy. We've invested a lot in actually developing some training and development programs, and not just for customers, but also for partners. And so we've seen a lot of interesting folks come along over the last 90 to 120 days, where we've got some really good partnerships being developed. And in order to enable those folks to support customers and support the market, we've done some really good stuff around coursework development, and ability to share more information and do self-service training and development for our customers and partners.
Yeah, that's really great, Scott. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure if folks have any questions related to any of the release, we'll make sure to include you at the end of the conversation here. So Scott, as the Chief Product Officer, and since you've joined, I know you've had a chance to meet with a lot of our customers. Are there any stories about how enterprises use AtScale that you'd want to share with our attendees?
For sure. So there's a lot of things that, we talk about cloud transformation. And if you look at some of the new messaging on the site, we really embrace this idea of, being able to connect anything and everywhere. And so ultimately, what customers are thinking about is, how can we begin to embrace these emerging platforms and leverage them in ways that, are seamless and transparent to our end users? And so a couple of the key points here are, as emerging cloud data platforms become more prevalent, customers want to move more data out and try those. And so what AtScale allows them to do is transparently move workloads out there, test and experience those platforms in their operational analytic workloads without disrupting the applications or the BI users. And so, we see a lot of interest there around just the ability to scale, the non-disruptive ability to add additional users or workloads, et cetera, and not have to be worried about the on-premise infrastructure that comes along with more of the traditional platforms. And I think a lot of beyond sort of the simplicity of supporting those environments from the infrastructure point of view and the scale and performance you get with it, a lot of it is also with AtScale is the ability to drastically improve the unit economics. And by that, you think about like all the emerging platforms in the cloud, in many cases, the economics of them are based upon the weight of the queries that you send. And by weight, I mean WEIGHT. And the bigger the query or the more data that you're going to go after, the more expensive those can become. And so a lot of customers have seen tremendous benefits from AtScale's aggregates and the way that we use AI and machine learning inside the platform to proactively monitor and then create these caching or acceleration layers so that we don't have to go to the back end for every different operational analytical query. And so I think that's, one of it's a significant benefit, but it's almost tangential when you think of what are the first ideas of why customers want to embrace cloud transformation. It's more on the infrastructure side, the ability to seamlessly scale and grow and change, but there's a tremendous economic value to AtScale in that equation as well.
Yeah, totally. And I know, we speak a lot about cloud transformation and the value of moving data to the cloud. I mean, enterprises are talking about that on a daily basis. And it's a topic that we hear within all of our sales calls and meetings and with prospects and even existing customers. But as we also know, many enterprises are still unable to move large portions of their data to the cloud. So on-premise environments will continue to be prevalent for the foreseeable future. Can you speak to some of the value AtScale provides to enterprises with these types of on-premise environments?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up. And I think the next slide will actually help us out here because, AtScale as a company sort of came out of, the original idea that the data lake, and in what its first instantiation, most customers think of the term data lake and they associate that with Hadoop. And a lot of the challenges that organizations faced was that, they moved data into this distributed file system and they didn't have to define a schema. And there was all sorts of value in that concept of a schema on need. But pretty quickly, folks figured out, there's also a challenge of how do you bring BI to that environment. And so that's really what AtScale was born out of. It was the idea that AtScale was going to become this BI layer onto the data lake. And I think for us as a company, our vision of the data lake has certainly evolved. I think the markets has as well. And we think about the data lake as the idea that all of your disparate pools of storage or information together collectively become the data lake. And so ultimately, when you think about that layer of virtualization that AtScale provides, or that abstraction, the idea is that ultimately the data lake will become that collection of assets that might be on-prem, might be in the cloud, could be some hybrid combination therein. But ultimately, AtScale is that layer of virtualization that ties it all together and effectively enables you to fish in that lake. And so, we've been, our early adopter customers, I'd say probably the first 50 were really focused on, leveraging AtScale within Hadoop or in the traditional on-premise, BI infrastructure. And that isn't going away. We continue to invest there. I think a lot of the benefits there are around things like, if it is, a Hadoop environment, concurrency, performance, scale of query users, the enablement of more traditional BI tools, like things like Power BI or Cognos or Tableau, and like enabling all of those technologies to seamlessly interact and move workloads that more traditionally were on an RDBMS to Hadoop will still be things that we do and customers that we support. But ultimately what we're hearing from the market is customers want to have a more holistic view of the environment, and they want to embrace all these platforms as one, as opposed to islands, if you will. Does that make sense, Court?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot to unpack there, but one of the things that tends to come up quite a bit on our calls and would typically be a showstopper is around security and data governance. And while, performance, your agility to move data from one location to another without business interruption, super valuable. A lot of organizations, or every organization, needs to have that layer of security or enable the existing security that they already have within their data platform in order to do their day-to-day business. So maybe you can speak to how AtScale treats security, especially when it comes to the crown jewels of any organization, their operational data.
For sure. So, as I mentioned earlier on, the three key tenets of AtScale are performance, security, and agility. And we've kind of touched on performance and agility, but you're right, we really haven't said a lot about security. But, for us, security is, one of the core tenets of the solution. And ultimately, we've built a lot of the solution around security concepts. So, as you think about emerging data platforms or technologies, in some cases, they don't necessarily meet all the governance or security infrastructure requirements that many organizations have, whether it's things like HIPAA, PII, and the like. Whereas with AtScale, we've embraced those sort of requirements and regulations since the beginning. And so ultimately, as you expand and you bring disparate platforms into the mix, right, what you're able to do is completely, continue to support your enterprise data governance and security requirements, and leverage AtScale to help mask potentially some of the deficiencies of the data platforms, or where there might be shortcomings in what's possible on these platforms as they come to market. AtScale can bridge the gap and enable end users to still meet all of the requirements or regulation that they face in the industry. And so I think it's a really unique perspective we have, because where we sit, is this concept or idea of an intelligent data fabric. You've got, AtScale is this layer of virtualization, if you will, that sits between the BI tools and platforms, and then these back end, data stores. And so ultimately, AtScale gets to see both sides of the query requests coming in, and then mapping where does that data really live, and how do we sort of bridge that logical to physical world to fulfill the request of the end user. And so based upon where we sit and the visibility we have to both sides of that, we're able to invoke very, very stringent governance and security policies. Whereas we've got some customers in the financial services segment that look at things like, GPDR, where we've got requirements where data can't leave specific zones, et cetera. And because of where AtScale sits, we're able to actually enforce those things in real time.
Yeah, that's super helpful and very well explained. So, I think that's great in terms of just getting through the points that, we wanted to address with you from a product standpoint. We do have a couple of questions from the audience that I'd like to pose to you if that's all right with you.
Yeah, for sure. And look, this is our first time, and so I appreciate everybody being patient with us. This is a super exciting thing that we're going to do on a monthly basis, and we're going to have customers come and speak at these sessions. So might be a little rocky today, but I appreciate the patience, and let's jump into some good questions from the customers and prospects.
Yeah, so the first one comes from Dan in the audience. He said, what sort of training and development resources does AtScale have? I know, and I think you already touched a little bit on just the training in general, but are there any specifics that maybe you could provide?
Yeah, so we actually formed a small organization in our services group earlier in the year to work on and focus solely on training and development. And so we've built a data platform where we can share information with partners and customers alike. We have defined training programs, and we've also built services around the AtScale offering. So things like if you're going from a single installation of AtScale and you want to go to a clustered implementation, or you want to do primary disaster recovery locations or more complex implementations, we have services offerings around those as well. So the training goes beyond just the traditional coursework of becoming an AtScale admin or that sort of thing. It's really much broader about the solution itself, implementations, support, and the like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure we'll get a follow-up if there's any more question around that. The next question comes from Ryan. He just asked, what is the upgrade process to 7.3 and any future releases?
Yeah, so 7.3 really sets sort of the foundation for a much broader conversation around virtualization and clustering. And we could certainly take that offline because it's a much deeper discussion. But the process to go to 7.3 is very straightforward. It does involve a cluster upgrade that will take a bit longer than some of the like I'd say like a patch or dot release. But the process to get to 7.3, we actually have some really good materials out there about them. So whether it's the services offering to do the upgrade or just the documentation out there about what the process looks like, I'd certainly recommend customers take a look at that. And then the process moving forward will continue to be incremental, even as we take on more virtualization concept and continue to evolve the way that you can deploy AtScale or manage your assets as they migrate between on-prem, cloud, multi-cloud, et cetera.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. The next question we have is from Tanmay, asking if there's any way that they can join two different cubes within the AtScale product.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to think about that question. So I guess, is there, and it depends, I guess I apologize, but it depends. Like the question of, can we join different data sets into a singular cube? That falls under the concepts of virtualization that we're talking about. And again, happy to have a much deeper conversation about that, because that is something that is in development currently. There's some really interesting breakthroughs we've had there. The other thing is, I guess, as you look at our offering and how we've sort of approached this idea of a data catalog, there's a lot of, whether it's dimensions, measures, and the like, that individuals create in cubes and don't necessarily share, and not because they don't want to share, but just perhaps they didn't think to share, where we can start to expose some of those assets based upon the metadata and allow people to see things that have been defined so that they can be reused in other cubes. So I think there's a deeper conversation to be had with Tianmei, and I'm happy to do that offline to understand probably in more depth what the underlying drivers behind the question. But I think the shorter answer is, yeah, there's some interesting ways that we can address the concept of combining separate cubes.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Another question from the audience is, have you seen particular traction in specific verticals? So maybe which verticals are we finding to be able to serve customers the best?
It's, as you mentioned earlier on, Court, like operational reporting is something that faces every organization, every vertical market. There's really no sort of discrepancy between them. And a lot of the work that they do is very similar. We've had a lot of success in financial services, pharma, and retail, but we're also starting to see a lot of traction in the manufacturing space. So I think by and large, the fact that we're doing a lot of operational analytical workloads sort of makes it a solution that transcends markets. But whether it was by virtue or luck or happenstance, I think probably our initial biggest markets were financial services and retail.
Yeah, totally. And just as an aside here, we're getting a bunch of questions coming through the pipe right now, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can here. But if we don't, I just want to let everybody know that we'll be able to follow up offline as well, and make sure we get to your question for you. So we have a question around roadmap. I don't know how far you want to dive into roadmap, but maybe there are some interesting near-term things that you want to talk about, or any programs that existing customers could get involved with.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously, we're always excited about, what's coming next and what the next thing is that we're going to deliver to the market. I guess I'll give you a bit of a teaser in our next release, which will be 7.4. There are 21 net new features that are being delivered, and a lot of those come out of customer conversations, executive briefings, feedback from prospects and our partners, and have really shaped sort of how we're thinking about the roadmap. I think, the things that I would say more broadly, again, underpinning that sort of performance, security, and agility concepts, virtualization is something that you'll see us do in much greater detail in the coming quarters. Time relative feature and functionality is also very important to us. We're currently running a private preview with Microsoft on Power BI. So continuing to expand the ecosystem of tools that we support, and the depth of support that we provide that ecosystem is obviously very important to us, as are the cloud data platforms. We've got Snowflake is currently in beta with a number of customers, and will go GA at the end of this quarter. So we continue to invest in the platforms, in the BI tools, and in the solution in general, as I mentioned, that term of virtualization and or the idea of more time relative support. And I see Tianmei's got a bunch of great points in here, and I'd love to find some time to talk to Tianmei, one-on-one, because I think there's some great questions about, multi-level aggregation, et cetera, that would be really good. And obviously on the performance side, we do have some nice tuning. I think Tianmei just Tanuj asked a question about documentation for performance comparisons, et cetera. I think we do have some good information internally about scaling the cluster, what workloads look like, and how you can effectively tune for performance, the cluster based upon the different workloads, et cetera. And obviously, those things will vary based upon the workload, the platform, concurrency rates, et cetera. So we do have some really good content about how to go about tuning a cluster. And we also have services offerings to help you do that. So If I didn't get to the entire thrust of that question, I apologize, but we can certainly take it offline.
Yeah, and we'll make sure, Scott, that we get everybody who's asking questions in the thread to get connected with you or somebody on the team here to make sure they get the right answer. One other question is, how often are we working with channel partners, either consulting firms or tech partners, and how are they with their level of involvement with customers?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of investment in and around the ecosystem of partners, and whether that means technical partners. I had the opportunity to speak at a joint customer with Tom O'Reilly from Cloudera a few weeks ago, where we're both doing a lot, and that's in the manufacturing space. So the level of involvement in the partnership ecosystem has been fantastic, but also in more the traditional, the big four or some of the ecosystem partners that are customer facing and what I would say is more the sales or solution side of things. We've been doing a lot of work in the Midwest recently with a couple of partners, predominantly around finance and healthcare, where there's a lot of opportunity to build a solution around AtScale, and we're seeing more of that where there's turnkey offerings where AtScale is a component of that sort of analytical strategy, but there's a much broader data management or digital transformation project in play where we become a part of that, and the partner is driving more of the overall program for the customer themselves.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to have more stories to talk to about that, especially with partners and within the channels. So if anybody out there is from a potential partner channel, obviously would love to hear from you. Scott, I know we're coming up on the half hour here. So one question that I have for you was, you've obviously had a bunch of success in your career. You were, most recently at DataRobot, decided to come to AtScale. AtScale is an emerging company, really great technology, but what convinced you to come here and take on this role and bring this type of technology to the market? What got you so excited about what AtScale is doing?
So I think there are a number of reasons, but when I met the team, incredibly passionate, bright folks, focused on a really big problem. And so as in my history or my career in doing AI and machine learning, a lot of the challenges we would see revolved around creating sort of logical views of the information to process into downstream or upstream applications, depending on how you look at it. And I felt like at AtScale, there was a real opportunity to accelerate those types of use cases and workloads and solve a material challenge for customers as they look to embrace not just emerging workloads or types of analytics, but also emerging platforms in EDWs, if you will. So the transformation and the sort of where the market sits right now, I think this is the most exciting place to be. And we have a tremendous opportunity to help customers make, arguably one of the largest transitions that they'll make in the time that, I've been in the market. I think that I probably ever will be in the market.
Great. Well, Scott, I want to thank you for all your time today and jumping on. It'd be great to have you come back every so often just to give an update to the community. But thanks again for all your time. And to everybody in the audience, I know there are a bunch of, or several still unanswered questions. As I already said, Scott and I, as well as Dan Schulwolf, will spend the time to reach out and make sure we get you connected with the right person within the AtScale organization to make sure we answer your question. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their time today. And please stay in touch as we will be promoting the next office hours next month. So thank you all for your time today, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks, Court. Thanks, everybody.